Imagine being born to humble beginnings in Colchester in 1844, to parents who were formerly enslaved before seeking refuge in Canada via the Underground Railroad, only to go on to be praised as the most prolific Black inventor of his time.
My name is Jason Miller, journalist and writer for the Toronto Star. Join me on a mission to learn more about Elijah McCoy, one of Canada's greatest Black inventors, hidden from our history books. This is Who's the Real McCoy on Caribbean Vibrations.
We start our search for details about Elijah McCoy here at the Toronto Railway Museum, where we hope to find information about a Canadian-born innovator whose inventions were broadly used and sought after by railway companies across North America in the late 1800s. Despite inventing devices that revolutionized the efficiency of the steam engines used in locomotives, we were unable to find any information about McCoy's contributions here at the museum. Our journey to learn more about Elijah McCoy has brought us here to the Toronto Film School for a chat with Andrew Moody, who brought Elijah's story to the big stage in his 2006 play, The Real McCoy.
I was doing a play written by Linda Griffiths, and I remember I was talking to an audience member. He said, I really like Linda Griffiths' work. And I said, yeah, she's the real McCoy. And he said, hey, do you know where that phrase came from? I lied. I was like, yeah, the Hatfield and the McCoys. Everybody knows that. The first thing I did when I got home that night is I went to Google. The phrase actually was inspired by an African-Canadian inventor who was born in the 19th century, and he was the son of runaway slaves. He was so clever that he was able to study in Edinburgh, Scotland. He was able to study engineering. And we didn't know who this Canadian inventor was. We had no idea who this Black man was born in Canada from runaway slaves. We just had no idea, and it's not taught in schools.
We also met with Dr. Rosemary Sadler, author, historian, and recipient of the Order of Ontario.
One of the realities of having a lack of Black history education is the continuation of anti-Black racism. Elijah had overstepped in the public perception what a Black man should be doing, especially a Black man at that time.
What he did was, he used his master engineering knowledge to create a lubricating cup that could keep a steam engine lubricated while it's running. That was revolutionary. Nobody had ever done that before. At that time, Adam Smith was inventing capitalism, It's hard to think about it now because, of course, trains, for us, are just a part of our world. But at the time, steam engine technology was brand new. It was revolutionary. And because a lot of people wanted to hide his contribution to steam engine technology, his contribution became hidden in the sands of time.
After learning more about the genius of this Canadian-born pioneer, I couldn't help but ask myself why McCoy's contributions remain missing from Canadian history books.
To truly understand more about McCoy's life and the impact he had on the world, I met with Irene Moore Davis, historian and curator at the Freedom Museum in Amherstburg, Ontario.
Elijah McCoy is considered an African-American inventor, one of the greatest African-American inventors. He was responsible not only for machinery that revolutionized the railway industry, but also the shipping industry, manufacturing. He invented Treadford tires. He invented a new kind of ironing board. He invented a new kind of lawn sprinkler. I mean, he was incredibly talented and prolific. Very few people realize that he was born here in Canada, that he is a product of the Underground Railroad, that he went through his schooling here in Canada prior to going to Scotland to become an engineer.
A key part of Elijah's story is his parents, who found refuge here in Canada. Tell me more about their story.
So Elijah McCoy's parents were both formerly enslaved individuals from Kentucky, George and Millie McCoy. George had actually been manumitted or freed by his enslaver, but Millie was still very much wanted as someone who had escaped from slavery. They made their way to Michigan. They eventually made their way to Colchester, Ontario. They raised 12 kids. Elijah was the third of those. And, they had all of these skills that they had acquired during their years of enslavement that they were able to turn into a profitable business here in Canada.
You and I discussed Elijah McCoy and how he's been claimed as this African-American innovator and inventor, but not much is said about his Canadian roots. Why do you think that is?
You know, the Americans do a much better job of claiming their Black history and celebrating it than we do. In Canada, we've been kind of erased from the narrative in terms of our past achievements and contributions. In Canada, Elijah McCoy's name and legacy really aren't celebrated as they should be, and that's true of so many people of African descent who played major roles in creating this country, this society, and all of these wonderful innovations that we all have come to rely on. In Detroit and in Ypsilanti, Michigan, there's a lot of attention paid to Elijah McCoy. Those are both places where he ended up living, but he could not find work as an engineer.
So then he went to Ypsilanti, Michigan, and of course, Michigan was the hotbed center in the world for steam engine technologies and trains. And as a Black person, even though he was trained as a master engineer, he couldn't work as a master engineer because this was America at a time when, racism was at its most virulent. So he was able to get a job shoveling coal on a train.
He wasn't able to get work as an engineer when he returned due to racism, but he still pivoted from that and became this extremely talented and prolific inventor.
I'm sure one day he's shoveling coal going, this is ridiculous. I'm a master engineer, what the hell am I doing here? And he noticed that steam engines can be very inefficient. The thing about steam engines back in those days is that steam is very corrosive to metal. Steam engines would seize up, and it was hard to keep them lubricated so that they would continue to run.
There were young boys, grease monkeys, who were brought in order to lubricate and tend to the other parts of the train. But what would happen, and what Elijah was able to witness, is that impatient conductors or passengers would insist that the train get moving. And sometimes these young boys would get caught up in the mechanisms of the train and be killed.
He found that trains were having to be stopped all the time for people to manually oil the engine parts. That resulted in delays and a great risk of injury to workers. He created a much more efficient system that automatically lubricated the engine on an ongoing basis. The trains didn't have to stop. Efficiency was achieved. People were saved from harm.
He created this device, and it worked like gangbusters. And he patented it.
But because of his race, he wasn't actually able to profit extensively from the work that he did. He often had to sell off the rights to his inventions to other manufacturers who could proceed with getting them produced.
The manufacturer, however, cannot tell anybody that a Black man invented it, or else nobody would buy it. So they had to keep his identity secret. And other companies, realizing how popular these lubricating cups were, they decided to manufacture their own, but they were never as good.
Individuals wanted to make sure that they ordered his stuff and not the knockoffs.
His was always the one that people asked for. So when manufacturers were selling their lubricating cups, people would come in and ask for the real
McCoy.
And in the end, as he was aging, he was just not able to keep pace with the demands of sustaining his life. He ended up in an infirmary that was basically for very poor people and died without much money at all.
Here in Detroit, McCoy's legacy lives on, with buildings and streets bearing his name, a historical marker in front of his former home, and exhibits of his work in local museums.
He's got a patent office named after him. He's in the National Inventors Hall of Fame in Ohio. All of those things are sort of the ways that he's celebrated. We have to do a better job of claiming our own Black Canadian heroes and making sure that Canadians know about them.
Can I help you? I, Mr. Rankin's apprentice, Elijah McCoy. I'm here about the engineering position. Oh, you've got to be joking.
So what was kind of your objective for what would become your 2006 play, The Real McCoy?
I was interested in what the life of Elijah McCoy represented.
It was so important for Black people at that time who were contending with ideas of white supremacy and just general sense that people of African descent were not achievement-oriented, that we didn't have the intellect to excel in these fields. It was so important for people to see what he was doing and to be able to celebrate it and comment on it.
At one of the most racist times in American history, he strove for excellence. You can be victimized, but that doesn't make you a victim. So no matter what you're experiencing in life, no matter what circumstance you're in, you don't have to be a victim. If Elijah McCoy can do it in the 19th century, then we can do it today.
We need to be making sure that all of these incredible stories are reflected in our curriculum, in our media, in our popular understanding of how this country and this society came about. I'm really looking forward to the day when every school kid knows about Elijah McCoy.
McCoy's ingenuity, courage, and determination fueled his triumph over rampant racial discrimination. Against all odds, he created more than 57 patents throughout his lifetime. Historians say it's long overdue for us to reclaim heroes like McCoy who deserve a place in the Canadian history books.